Hello, here we are again. Well, this time, a sequel. 2 months ago, I put up the video of Bad Girl, and I ought to have put up its sequel, this one, but I was a YouTube newbie at the time, and I hardly knew what I was doing. So here it is now, Bad Girl 2. This story follows the parallel lives of twin sisters Angela and Anne as they navigate the aftermath of profound trauma and long-term incarceration. Angela, a convicted multiple murderer, undergoes a radical personality transformation, evolving from a violent criminal into a compassionate and devout Christian. Upon her release from an 18-year sentence, she moves in with Anne, who is struggling with early onset Parkinson's disease and her own history of legal and emotional turmoil. While the sisters attempt a fragile reconciliation rooted in their shared faith, a vengeful former inmate named Jill begins tracking Angela to London. The text explores themes of redemption and the persistence of the past as the characters seek a sense of peace despite the lingering shadows of their violent upbringing. I was happy to conclude this two-parter, Bad Girl, written in 2012 and Bad Girl finished in 2020, because it had been on my mind for quite a few years. Well, even I was surprised at how detailed the AI voices were for this one. And I think it's the longest one that the AI voices have made so far. It's incredibly detailed. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. And as usual, if you like it, you might like to ring that bell and subscribe. That'd be nice.
Imagine you are standing on the pavement. You're just watching this woman step out from behind the heavy, reinforced iron gates of a high-security prison.
Right.
And the year is 2030. The air out there smells of, synthetic ozone and heavy city exhaust.
Quite a shock to the system.
Yeah, a massive stark contrast to the sterile, chemically treated air she's been breathing for almost 2 decades. She's 42 years old now. She is leaning pretty heavily on a walking stick, just squinting into a world she barely recognizes.
Because she's been away for 18 years.
18 long, agonizing years behind bars. And we aren't just talking about doing time in a general population wing here. A full third of that sentence was spent in the crushing, mind-altering grip of solitary confinement.
Total sensory deprivation.
Exactly. Her name is Angela Tenneb, and today we are looking at a stack of incredibly detailed sources based on a sequel. It was written in 2020 to follow up the massive, highly controversial 2012 book Bad Girl.
And our focus today is strictly set on this sequel.
Right. So Angela is released on license. She steps out into Camden Town to live quietly with her widowed twin sister.
She goes to church.
Yeah, she prints charity greeting cards. She speaks softly. By all outward metrics, she is completely 100% rehabilitated.
But here is the terrifying hook of this entire narrative. You don't just leave behind a life of violence, extortion, and multiple murders by walking through a gate and finding God.
You really don't.
Her enemies are still out there. They will not let her forget, and they certainly will not forgive. She might be walking free on the streets of London, but she's miles away from being safe.
It sets up an incredibly dense, almost suffocating atmosphere right from the jump.
It really does. What this narrative does so brilliantly is it traps you in a moral vice. It forces you to look at a certified, documented psychopath who has committed unspeakable atrocities. And then it asks you to evaluate the very nature of guilt in the face of what appears to be a miraculous transformation.
It really pushes the boundaries of how we view the justice system. I mean, we like to think of prison as a place for rehabilitation, right?
Right.
But when someone who has taken lives, who destroyed entire families, shattered a community, when they actually claim to have found a personal sense of peace...
Does that erase the debt?
Right. It makes us deeply uncomfortable. It asks if true absolute forgiveness is ever a tangible reality or just an illusion we sell ourselves to make the world feel less chaotic.
That moral friction is exactly the mission of today's deep dive.
We are going to meticulously trace how a notorious multiple murderer tries to navigate the blinding, futuristic reality of a 2030 London.
And we're going to dig deep into the bizarre, unprecedented medical anomalies behind her supposed rehabilitation.
Oh yeah, because trust me, the science and the sheer weirdness of it will completely throw you.
And we're going to untangle this invisible, terrifying web of revenge that is slowly, methodically tightening around her neck as she tries to build this mundane life.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the sheer, unadulterated horror of her early years in the system.
Let's go back to 2012.
Yeah, when Angela first arrives at the Category O women's prison at Pennerbury, she is not the docile, spectacled woman clutching a cane that we see in 2030.
Not at all. The sources are incredibly graphic.
They describe her behavior as feral. She was a caged animal.
For the first 5 years, she is just a nightmare of violence.
Fighting the guards, fighting the inmates, fighting the rigid structure of the institution itself.
And we really have to look at the psychological pressure cooker she was placed in. Penderbury is not a place that fosters gentle correction.
It's an uncompromising fortress.
Right. The staff there are dealing with the most dangerous individuals in the state, yet even among that demographic, Angela was considered an outlier of violence.
She was deemed entirely too volatile to mix with the general population.
The isolation she was subjected to wasn't just punitive. It was a desperate containment strategy by a prison administration that had no idea how to handle her lack of basic human empathy.
And that containment strategy basically amounted to chemical warfare on her brain.
The medical reports from her first few years are deeply disturbing.
The guards were terrified of her, so the solution was to keep her heavily doped on a cocktail of industrial-strength tranquilizers.
It was chemical subjugation.
Totally. And the system was ready to wash its hands of her completely. By her 4th year, a Home Office report crosses the desk.
Written by some distant bureaucratic doctor.
Exactly. A doctor who hadn't even bothered to sit in the same room as her, let alone conduct a proper psychiatric evaluation. They just slapped the label of schizophrenic on her file.
The official recommendation was to yank her out of the penal system entirely and bury her in a secure mental hospital.
Which would have been the absolute end of her story.
It would have. If you look at the reality of secure mental hospitals for violent, untreatable offenders, especially in the context of how the system operated a decade ago, it is essentially a black hole.
They rely on heavy, permanent chemical sedation to manage violent behavior.
Had that transfer gone through, Angela Tenneb would have disappeared into a chemically induced fog.
The system would have effectively erased her consciousness, leaving her to emerge decades later as a hollowed-out shell.
But that administrative death sentence was intercepted by a single, highly controversial figure.
Dr. Rebecca Armand.
Yes, the governor of Pennerbury.
Dr. Armand completely derails the Home Office's plan. She was German-born, highly educated, and ran her prison with a microscopic level of detail.
She flat out refused the schizophrenic diagnosis.
And basically saved Angela from a lifetime of being a drugged zombie. But I want to be clear here. Dr. Armand wasn't some bleeding heart idealist who was blind to Angela's horrific past.
No, not at all.
The sources note that Dr. Armand kept a file on Angela that her own secretary described as ridiculously and unnecessarily thick.
She demanded weekly, granular reports.
Yeah.
She wanted to know what Angela ate, how much she exercised, the exact state of her physical appearance, her sleep patterns.
It absolutely exhausted the prison staff. The guards despised Angela.
The consensus on the cell block was that showing Angela an ounce of compassion was a total waste of taxpayer money.
They openly joke that the best rehabilitation for her would be getting stuffed in a sack, weighted down with heavy bricks, and tossed into the freezing sea.
What's fascinating here is the sheer observational brilliance of Dr. Armand.
She saw something everyone else missed.
She saw a micro-expression that the rest of the world, including the highly trained prosecutors and psychiatrists at Angela's trial, completely missed.
Dr. Armand had pored over the transcripts of Angela's 2012 trial.
Now, the media narrative at the time was entirely focused on Angela's absolute lack of empathy. The press painted her as a cold-blooded monster.
Right. When her own twin sister stood in the witness box crying, Angela's face was a mask of stone.
Not a single trace of regret.
But Dr. Armand zeroed in on a tiny, almost imperceptible footnote buried in the trial logs.
A social worker was on the stand, detailing the squalid conditions of the property where Angela had lived, and casually mentioned a mundane detail. Yes. A cat found on the premises was too old to be rehoused, so animal control euthanized it.
And at the mere mention of that cat being put down, the trial reporter noted that Angela gripped the metal rail of the dock.
Her mouth tightened.
And for a split second, her eyes visibly glistened with tears. A single tear for a stray cat.
While she felt absolutely nothing for the human beings she slaughtered.
Precisely.
It highlights a known psychological phenomenon where individuals with severe psychopathy or extreme antisocial personality disorders can sometimes compartmentalize empathy.
Projecting it entirely onto animals.
Yes, while remaining violently detached from humans. For Dr. Armand, that glisten in the eye was the proof of concept.
It proved the neurological machinery for empathy wasn't entirely dead.
It was just profoundly misdirected. There was a spark of emotion there, however warped, and Dr. Armand decided it was worth salvaging.
That hyperfixation on a cat saved Angela from the chemical straitjacket. But let's not pretend it was a magic fix.
Far from it.
Even with Dr. Armand running interference, Angela was still a violent terror. That is, until her 5th year of incarceration.
And this is the point in the source material where the narrative takes a sharp left turn into the completely bizarre.
It's a quiet Sunday morning in March. A guard is walking the solitary block delivering breakfast trays and looks through the viewing hatch.
And Angela is collapsed on the cold concrete floor of her cell.
She is completely unconscious, lying in a pool of her own vomit. It's a massive medical emergency.
She's shackled, rushed under a heavy armed guard to the nearest civilian hospital.
And the surgeons discover a severely inflamed appendix.
They rush her into emergency surgery for a routine appendectomy.
Now, it is crucial to underline the medical reality of this procedure.
Yes, an appendectomy is a standard, run-of-the-mill abdominal surgery. It involves removing a small, finger-shaped pouch attached to the large intestine.
It involves absolutely zero interaction with the brain, the central nervous system, or the frontal lobe.
It is not psychosurgery, it is plumbing.
Right. So how in the world do we explain what happens next? Because when she wakes up from the anesthesia, the monster is gone.
Literally overnight.
By the 3rd day of her recovery in the secure hospital wing, the guards assigned to watch her are sending these completely baffled, almost panic reports back to Dr. Armand at the prison.
They describe a massive, inexplicable personality alteration.
The specific word a hardened, cynical prison guard uses to describe the notorious killer Angela Tenneb is pleasant.
Pleasant.
Before the surgery, Angela would throw her food at the walls and scream about the prison slop.
Now, she is sitting up in bed, smiling and politely eating every single bite of the bland hospital jelly.
She is making polite small talk with the surgical consultant. She is thanking the nurses for checking her vitals.
One guard actually jokes to the governor that aliens must have abducted the real Angela and swapped in an identical twin with a sunny disposition.
The reaction from the medical establishment is immediate and frantic.
Dr. Armand is no fool. She assumes Angela is running a highly sophisticated long con manipulation.
She contacts the surgical consultant, who verifies the reports but is equally defensive,
reiterating that they didn't go anywhere near her brain.
This kicks off a massive, multi-year medical investigation. They subject Angela to hundreds of hours of intensive psychotherapy.
They run every physical and neurological test available.
Electrocardiography to check her heart rhythms.
So electroencephalograms to map the electrical activity in her brain.
They put her through 2 separate, highly detailed MRI scans, and the result completely baffles the medical community.
Because the scans physically confirm a dramatic, undeniable neurological shift in her brain chemistry and structure.
Oh, wait, I have to stop you there. Are we really supposed to buy that a surgeon clipping out a bad appendix accidentally cured severe psychopathy?
That sounds wild.
That sounds like a plot from a 1950s sci-fi B movie. How did the scientific community in this universe actually justify that leap in logic?
Well, it sparks a massive intellectual debate within the narrative. The medical world desperately tries to rationalize it.
2 highly respected Oxford professors from the Psychological Medicine Center catch wind of the case.
And they spend years studying her. They hypothesize complex theories involving the trauma of the sudden illness.
Or the shock of the severe physical pain.
Or perhaps a completely unprecedented 1 in a billion neuroplastic reaction to the specific chemical compound of the anesthesia used during the surgery.
There are real-world theories about the gut-brain axis, how severe trauma to the intestinal tract can wildly alter mood and cognition.
But even that is a stretch for curing homicidal psychopathy.
The Oxford professors eventually publish a book detailing how a psychopath was cured by a surgical accident.
The book becomes an absolute juggernaut, a massive bestseller across the UK, Europe, and America.
which ironically provides Angela with a small, steady royalty income. But science can only offer theories. Angela, however, offers a very different, deeply personal explanation.
No, Angela's explanation is entirely unscientific and totally chilling.
When Dr. Armand sits her down and asks her point blank what happened in that operating room, Angela is calm.
She says that when she was pushed under the heavy anesthesia, the feelings of absolute rage, what she vividly describes as a literal darkness or a shadow living inside her chest.
She says it recoiled against the extreme physical pain of the appendicitis and simply fled her body.
She doesn't have amnesia. She remembers every single horrific thing she did.
She remembers pulling the trigger on the policeman. She readily admits she did terrible, wicked things and that she deserves her punishment.
But she smiles and tells the governor that the shadow has permanently left her.
This creates a fascinating thematic split between clinical rehabilitation and spiritual rebirth.
While the Oxford professors are analyzing her MRI scans, Angela turns to faith to explain her sudden emptiness.
She dives into Christianity. She takes rigorous, intensive Bible classes.
She gets baptized in the prison.
She develops an unshakable, fundamental belief that God used the trauma of the surgery as a divine scalpel to physically cut the evil out of her soul.
And the craziest part is, her behavior over the next 13 years completely backs up her claim.
Dr. Armand takes a massive professional risk and tentatively moves her out of solitary confinement and back into the main Category A population.
Which, let's be honest, is like dropping a declawed cat into a fighting pit.
Exactly. But Angela's fearsome mythical reputation from her early years acts as an invisible shield initially.
And then, her genuinely exemplary, humble behavior slowly wins the entire prison over.
She becomes the ultimate model prisoner. She enrolls in every educational class available. She sews costumes for the prison Christmas pageants.
She sets up a small printing press in the vocational wing to make greeting cards.
And donates all the proceeds to cancer research. She works grueling shifts in the kitchen without complaint.
She even becomes a bizarre sort of minor celebrity.
Yeah, visiting medical professionals and sociologists request to meet the living embodiment of the medical miracle, and she takes tea with them in the governor's office.
Yet the narrative never lets us forget the heavy, inescapable physical toll of her past.
Fast forward to the year 2030. Angela is transferred to the Newsbury Open Prison to prepare for her release. She is now 42 years old.
The terrifying, sylph-like, intimidating figure of violence from 2012 is completely gone.
The years of starchy prison food and limited mobility have caught up with her. She has gained over 25 kilograms.
She relies on a walking cane because a bad slip on some wet metal stairs ruined her right knee.
But the true anchors to her past are etched directly into her skin.
The text gives us this incredibly visceral, grounding scene of her taking a shower in the communal bathrooms of the open prison.
The hot water is pasting her mousy, dry hair to her skull like rat tails.
As she washes with cheap prison soap, her fingers trace the roughened, heavily darkened skin of 2 bullet wounds on her upper shoulder and arm.
These are the physical remnants of the violent, bloody shootout with the police that ended her crime spree 18 years ago.
We get a glimpse into her internal monologue here. She is deeply, profoundly ashamed of these wounds.
She is equally ashamed of the thick, ropey, fully healed scars crisscrossing her arms.
From the intense self-mutilation she inflicted on herself during her manic first month of solitary confinement.
It's the reason she obsessively wears long-sleeve shirts, even during the sweltering heat of the summer.
She went through the agonizing process of having all her terrifying gang-style prison tattoos laser removed.
Except for one.
And that single remaining tattoo is a brilliant visual metaphor for the entire theme of the book.
It's a thick, dark tattoo of a heavy chain encompassing her entire neck.
The prison doctors deemed it medically unsafe to use the laser removal equipment on the sensitive skin over her carotid artery and jugular vein.
So, despite her newfound faith, her docile demeanor, and her middle-aged, spectacled appearance,
she literally wears a permanent, unremovable chain around her neck.
It is a collar permanently linking her to her previous life of violence. It silently communicates to everyone who sees her that internal change does not erase external history.
Speaking of history that can't be erased, we need to shift our focus outside the prison walls.
We really do. We need to talk about Angela's twin sister, Anne Harrow.
Because while Angela was locked in a physical cell, Anne was slowly being buried alive in a psychological prison of her own making.
The trauma stems all the way back to the sentencing at the end of the 2012 trial. The judge brings the gavel down. The guards step forward to lead Angela down to the holding cells.
And in that final moment, Angela turns and locks eyes with Anne across the packed courtroom.
The book describes it as a look of pure, concentrated, saturated anger.
It was a glare so venomous that it literally infected Anne's mind. It became a parasite.
Anne lived with a persistent, heavy sense of dread for years. She describes it like a dull, throbbing toothache.
She woke up with it, carried it through her day, and went to sleep with it.
She was so terrified of that glare that she completely avoided visiting her sister in prison for over a year.
But that overwhelming dread wasn't just the natural fear of a violent sibling. It was deeply rooted in a massive, devastating secret of betrayal.
You see, Anne and her then-boyfriend John were the architects of Angela's downfall.
They were the ones who found the damning video cartridge, the irrefutable evidence of Angela's crimes, and anonymously mailed it to the police.
The visual evidence on that tape was so graphic and compelling that the prosecution barely had to break a sweat to secure the conviction.
Angela always suspected she had been betrayed from within her own circle, even if she couldn't definitively prove it was Anne.
The crushing guilt of that betrayal, combined with the fear of retribution, slowly ate away at Anne's sanity.
And the universe decides to punish that betrayal by destroying John's life in the most tragic, absurdly unlucky, butterfly effect way possible.
Let's jump to 2015. Anne and John have managed to carve out a little slice of happiness. They just had a quiet, lovely wedding ceremony in Camden.
But a few months prior to the wedding, John was involved in a painfully minor traffic incident.
He's at a red light, his foot slips, and he lightly bumps the rear bumper of the stationary car in front of him.
The other driver gets out, and he's clearly drunk.
He gets belligerent, starts yelling, and accuses John of messing around with his tart instead of watching the road.
John, defending his fiancée's honor, loses his temper for 5 seconds.
He throws a single punch and breaks the drunk driver's nose.
It is a momentary lapse in judgment that happens 100 times a day in any major city.
But the bureaucratic consequences are catastrophic. Because the police are called to an assault, John is processed.
He has to give his fingerprints and submit to a routine DNA swab at the station.
And that biological data is fed into the massive national police database.
I still can't get over the sheer awful luck of this.
The computer runs the swab. It triggers a match.
His DNA perfectly matches the tiny trace of genetic material left on the adhesive backing of the packaging from the anonymous video cassette sent to the police 3 years earlier.
Just like that, the quiet life is over. The police storm their Camden Terrace house, physically shove John against the wall, and arrest him for perverting the course of justice.
Because he had held on to the videotape for a period before sending it anonymously.
Causing extra investigative work and delaying the capture of a murderer, the system decides to crush him.
The judge wants to make a loud public example of him.
The gavel comes down, and John is handed a brutal, draconian 10-year sentence in Beer Prison in Norfolk.
The scene in the courtroom is devastating. Anne loses complete control.
She is screaming uncontrollably, fighting the ushers, and has to be physically carried out of the court.
Her new husband is dragged away for a decade because he tried to stop a serial killer.
It is an incomprehensible blow, and the stress of that injustice acts as a massive accelerant on Anne's physical health.
Human bodies are not designed to carry that level of chronic, high-octane cortisol.
In the spring of 2016, right after John's final legal appeal is brutally denied, Anne collapses in the courtroom lobby.
A week later, she is sitting in the sterile, aggressively functional office of a neurological consultant named Dr. Khatri.
He's a man with a graying beard who shuffles his paperwork, avoids eye contact, and delivers news that shatters her reality.
At the incredibly young age of 29, Dr. Khatri diagnoses Anne with young-onset Parkinson's disease.
Let's just pause and absorb that. You are 29 years old. Your sister is a notorious mass murderer. Your husband was just locked in a cage for 10 years for doing the right thing.
And now, a doctor tells you that your own nervous system is going to slowly, progressively betray you.
The physical decline is rapid and humiliating. She starts experiencing bone-deep, extreme tiredness.
Her skin loses its elasticity and deteriorates. Insomnia takes over.
Then the tremors start. Her hands begin to shake uncontrollably. Her normal walk degenerates into a stiff, shuffling gait.
But Anne doesn't just curl up and die. She is a fighter.
She dives headfirst into young onset support groups. She takes over the daily management of John's commercial cleaning company, Harrow Cleaning.
Successfully managing a payroll of 30 women.
And she completely, radically overhauls her entire lifestyle to wage war against the disease.
Her coping mechanisms become incredibly rigid. They border on asceticism.
She is desperate to maintain control over a body that is rebelling against her.
By 2023, she is 36 years old, and she treats her physical form like a highly regulated temple.
She adopts a strict, uncompromising vegan diet to reduce inflammation.
She forces herself to walk to the local gym 7 days a week.
Pushing through the fatigue for intense cardio, strength, and targeted balance training to fight the shuffling gait.
She meditates daily, visualizing her neurons healing themselves.
She finds a strange, tactile solace in throwing pottery. She buys a small secondhand electric kiln and sets it up in a standard B&Q wooden shed at the bottom of her small Camden garden.
Spending hours molding wet clay to force her shaking hands into submission.
And crucially, in a parallel to her sister, she finds a devout Christian faith.
It's a deeply private faith.
She spends hours sitting alone in the cold, quiet solemnity of her local parish, St. Matthew's, praying for her husband and for her own failing body.
It's this bizarre shared discovery of Christianity that finally builds a fragile bridge over the chasm of their past.
In 2018, Anne receives a thick envelope in the mail.
It's a 10-page, densely handwritten letter from Angela.
Pouring her heart out, begging for forgiveness, and detailing her miraculous surgery-induced transformation and subsequent baptism.
Anne is terrified, but her faith compels her to respond.
She takes a long, agonizing coach ride up to Yorkshire. Her stomach is tied in absolute knots.
She is mentally preparing herself to face the screaming, violent monster she locked eyes with in 2012.
She is led into the sterile visiting room, points to a plastic table, and sees a stranger.
She sees a meek, middle-aged woman with plain, mousy brown hair, wearing shapeless tan prison trousers.
The woman has spectacles on a cord around her neck, leans on a walking stick, and carries an extra 25 kilos.
The text notes that the only conceivable way Anne recognizes her own twin sister is the dark chain tattoo encircling her neck.
The dynamic of that reunion is incredibly delicate.
They are two women completely broken by the same events, sitting across a plastic table.
They slowly reach out, their fingers curling around each other. Angela weeps and apologizes for the trail of bodies and the destruction of their family.
Anne, in a moment of profound vulnerability, confesses her own nightmares.
Marrying John, the agonizing guilt of his 10-year prison sentence, and the terrifying reality of her Parkinson's diagnosis.
They bond over their shared, mysterious conversions to Christianity.
It acts as a universal solvent, dissolving years of hatred and creating an uneasy truce.
This meeting is the catalyst for the arrangement that drives the plot. When Angela is finally released on license in 2030, she will come to live with Anne in her modest Camden terraced house.
Which sounds like the setup for a heartwarming redemption movie. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Because while Angela has found inner peace, the reality of the prison system doesn't care about your spiritual journey.
Prison politics are a matter of brutal physical survival, and a massive violent threat is brewing in the shadows of the open prison system.
Enter a woman named Jill Martin.
Jill is the embodiment of the collateral damage caused by systemic abuse. The sources provide a harrowing, deeply uncomfortable look into her background.
When we meet her, she is 28, lean, and physically hard.
Her arms are a roadmap of trauma, covered in track marks from needles and thick scars from razor slashes.
Her dark brown hair is buzzed practically to the scalp.
Her face, neck, and knuckles are smothered in cheap, aggressive prison tattoos.
And if you look closely at her face, you can see the faint puncture wounds where cheap, heavy jewelry used to sit in her mouth, ears, eyebrows, and nostrils.
Her trauma is rooted in absolute domestic horror. When Jill was just a child, the moment she started developing breasts, her abusive stepfather, Bill, began staring at her obsessively.
To cover his own perverted, predatory tracks and deflect suspicion from the mother, he started a campaign of relentless psychological warfare.
He coined the nickname Ugly Muggly.
He would deliberately pick the lock and burst into the cramped bathroom while she was showering, pretend it was an accident, and then stand there mocking her naked, developing body.
He would laugh and say, "Come on, Ugly Muggly, who would ever want to see you naked?"
That systematic psychological abuse completely destroyed her self-worth.
It convinced Jill she was fundamentally repulsive and unlovable. It turned her completely feral.
The timeline of her descent is brutal. By 13, she was pregnant.
By 14, she had endured a dangerous illegal abortion. She sought numbness in soft drugs, which inevitably escalated to a crippling heroin addiction.
By 18, she was in the system for violently mugging a grandmother.
She eventually lands a heavy 8-year sentence for an armed robbery where she slashed a convenience store customer's hand with a knife.
Jill's entire existence is a cycle of rejection and escalating violence.
The final nail in the coffin of her humanity comes from her own mother, who writes her a cold, typed letter to the prison disowning her completely,
stating that she and Bill are moving away and never want to see her face again.
This sends Jill into a horrific spiral of severe self-harm, but the system eventually shifts her.
In her 6th year, she is transferred to the Newsbury Open Prison, which has a slightly more relaxed regime.
There, she meets a middle-class, well-spoken woman named Kay. Kay is serving 4 years for a complex financial fraud that she claims she didn't even realize her ex-girlfriend was committing.
Despite their entirely different backgrounds, Jill and Kay fall deeply, desperately in love.
For Jill, it is the first time in her entire life someone has looked at her and hasn't seen ugly-muggly.
It's a quiet, fiercely protective, intensely loyal relationship that miraculously transforms them both into model, compliant prisoners.
But the fragile peace Jill finally found is completely shattered by a chaotic, administrative disaster.
Let's rewind slightly to 2024, back when Angela was still at the Penitentiary Category A prison.
There was a massive, violent riot on one of the wings. Fires were set. Guards were attacked.
During the emergency lockdown procedures, standard protocols went out the window.
Guards were just grabbing prisoners from the exercise yards and shoving them into whatever cells were closest to secure the building.
In the absolute confusion of the smoke and alarms, Jill Martin is shoved into Angela Tenneb's cell.
The heavy door slams shut and locks. Angela, who has spent over a decade proving she has reformed, wants absolutely nothing to do with the riot.
She ignores the chaos outside, puts her pillow over her head, and goes to sleep.
But in the dead of the pitch-black night, Angela wakes up to a terrifying sensation.
She finds Jill sitting on the edge of her bed.
Jill's hand is under the sheets, touching Angela's thigh, and her face is hovering inches away in the dark.
We have to understand Angela's psychological state here.
The sources explicitly note that Angela, heavily influenced by her rigid, conservative interpretation of her newfound faith, harbors a strong, visceral aversion to homosexuality.
Waking up to a sexual advance in a dark, locked cell triggers a massive panic response.
Angela aggressively, violently tells Jill to back off, threatening to scream for the riot squad.
Jill, completely mortified, retreats to the corner of the cell for the rest of the night. It is a profoundly embarrassing rejection.
But the real damage happens the next morning. The lockdown ends, and the inmates are led out to queue for breakfast.
Angela is on high alert. She sees Jill standing a few people ahead in the line, giggling with some other hardened inmates.
Angela's paranoia spikes. She misreads the situation completely, assuming Jill is bragging about the intimate encounter in the dark to bolster her reputation.
So, Angela decides to establish dominance.
She loudly, aggressively, and publicly humiliates Jill. She outs her in front of the entire landing of dangerous women, calling her horrific names, labeling her a pervert, and degrading her in the most explicit terms possible.
You have to imagine the psychological nuke that sets off in Jill's brain.
For a woman whose entire core trauma is rooted in being called ugly-muggly.
In feeling sexually repulsive and ashamed of her body, this aggressive public rejection and humiliation by a figure she was intimidated by completely shatters her.
It breeds a dark, toxic, festering hatred that she nurses for years.
Fast forward back to the open prison, months before Angela's release.
Jill and her girlfriend Kay have a tense argument over something trivial, and Jill is practically vibrating with displaced anger.
During the mandatory exercise period, Jill spots Angela.
She marches right up to her, invading her personal space, and explicitly threatens her.
She locks eyes with Angela and slowly, deliberately draws a finger across her own throat like a pirate promising a slaughter.
And this interaction is brilliant because it forces the reader to question Angela's supposed cure.
Does the appendectomy cure psychopathy, or does it just put it to sleep?
Because Angela's response to this death threat is chillingly calculated.
She realizes she is mere weeks away from being released on license. A physical altercation, a fight in the yard, would instantly revoke her release date and send her back to solitary.
She cannot afford to fight Jill, so she decides to neutralize the threat strategically, using the system as her weapon.
She formally requests a private meeting with Alex Portman, a senior staff member tasked with managing inmate emotional issues.
It is an absolute masterclass in ruthless, calculated survival. Angela sits in Portman's office, plays the terrified, reformed Christian, and tells Alex she is in genuine fear for her life.
She plays coy, saying she doesn't want to be a grass, but then she drops a massive, highly specific piece of actionable intelligence.
She casually brings up an unsolved, horrific assault from years ago back at Pennerbury, where an inmate named Margaret Howell had her face violently slashed with a jagged, broken glass jar of face cream right after an Easter Sunday church service.
Angela leans in and reviews that she overheard Jill telling Kay how stupid Kay had been to carry out that attack so openly in the corridors.
Angela explicitly fingers Jill's soulmate, Kay, as the attacker.
Angela knows exactly how the prison bureaucracy works. She knows they will prioritize solving an old violent assault over a vague threat in the yard.
It is a devastatingly effective surgical strike against Jill's heart.
The prison bureaucracy, which normally moves at a glacial pace, acts with terrifying lightning speed when it comes to internal violent discipline.
Within 48 hours, Kay is ripped from her cell and subjected to a harsh internal adjudication.
Without the need for a civilian trial, she is found guilty on the balance of probabilities.
The punishment is immediate and severe. 15 months are officially added to Kay's sentence, and she is dragged out of the open prison in tears, immediately transferred back to the harsh, violent environment of the Category F facility at Pennerbury.
Jill is absolutely broken. The only source of love and stability she has ever known is ripped away from her right before they were supposed to be released together to start a new life.
And Jill is no fool. She knows exactly who orchestrated the hit. When Jill is finally released a month after Angela, she is no longer just an ex-con trying to go straight.
She is a woman possessed by a singular, burning desire for revenge.
She has no family to go to, absolutely no money, and nothing left to lose. But before she walks out the gates, she gets a small piece of help.
A sympathetic, old-school, butch lesbian guard named Chief Officer Janet Scott,
who despises Angela for her homophobic outbursts and fake piety.
She slips Jill a parting gift. It's a battered paperback book titled I Leap Over the Wall.
Jill opens it on the bus ride out, and hidden inside the pages is a folded, official prison memo. Written on it in large block capital letters are two words, Camden, London.
It is a code and treasure map to her revenge.
Jill gets off the coach, walks into a dingy pub called the Three Rabbits, and spends almost all her meager release savings on a double whiskey and a pint of bitter.
She makes her choice right there. She skips her connecting train to her designated halfway house.
She heads straight into the belly of London. To fund her mission, she reverts to her old, violent instincts.
She brutally mugs an 80-year-old pensioner in an alleyway, stealing his wallet.
She uses the cash to buy baggy, oversized cherry shop clothes to disguise her heavily tattooed frame, and then walks directly into an Argos store.
She purchases a heavy, professional set of kitchen knives.
She slips into the shadows of Camden, sleeping rough, hunting the streets for Angela Tenneb.
And while Jill is hunting her with knives in the shadows, Angela is completely overwhelmed trying to navigate the blinding, disorienting light of 2030 Camden.
I want to spend a moment on this because walking out of Euston Station is a massive psychological shock for her.
She's been locked in a gray, concrete, highly controlled box for 18 years.
The world didn't just move on, it mutated. The sensory overload is intense and frightening.
The famous Camden Market, which she remembers as a sprawling, chaotic haven for quirky hippies.
People strumming acoustic guitars on the pavement and stalls selling homemade silver jewelry and new age witchcraft potions. It's all gone.
The roads themselves have been ripped up and replaced with hard-wearing, recycled plastic composites.
The market is now a deafening, neon-lit hub dominated by sleek electronic stalls selling foldable phones, wearable tech devices, and virtual reality gear.
Run by aggressive, fast-talking vendors shouting in languages she doesn't even recognize.
The world has hardened, digitized, and accelerated, leaving her completely behind.
Angela manages to secure a menial job working the night shift at a massive, sterile mega supermarket on the high street.
It's mindless, repetitive work, but it pays the bills. However, before she can truly try to blend into this alien landscape, she feels a profound, almost manic spiritual compulsion to confront her violent past directly.
She sits Anne down in the kitchen and tells her she intends to track down and visit her former victims from the 2012 crimes, specifically Carla and Samantha Grant, to apologize face-to-face.
Anne is horrified. She explicitly warns Angela against it, pleading with her, asking what possible good it could do to rip open those old wounds.
But Angela is stubborn. She claims it is a vital part of her Christian repentance. It's on her bucket list.
It is such a staggeringly bad idea, but Angela takes the underground out to the wealthy enclave of Hampstead.
She walks up the steep hill to this massive, imposing white mansion with a lead-green roof backed right up against the sprawling woods of Hampstead Heath.
There are 2 high-end luxury cars parked in the sweeping drive, and a hired groundskeeper riding a motorized lawnmower. It screams generational wealth.
She presses the brass intercom button on the heavy black electric security gates.
There is a very tense, crackling exchange with the estate's butler, a man named Alan Brunswick.
When he asks who is calling, and Angela states her name, there is a dead, horrifying silence on the other end of the speaker.
But eventually, with a loud metallic hum, the heavy gates swing open.
Carla Grant authorizes her entry, perhaps out of a morbid, uncontrollable curiosity to see the monster who ruined her life.
And the visual shock for Angela is immediate and humbling. Carla, who in the 2012 trial was this impossibly thin, glamorous, vibrant socialite, is now significantly overweight and permanently confined to a highly advanced motorized wheelchair.
Angela's guilt instantly spikes. She assumes her violent kidnapping caused this paralysis.
But Carla bitterly, coldly corrects her. It's multiple sclerosis, a degenerative neurological disease, not a bullet. Put her in the chair.
But make no mistake, the heavy, suffocating trauma of Angela's crimes still permeates every square inch of that opulent room.
And then the heavy oak doors open, and the real shock of the afternoon arrives. A man walks into the drawing room.
He's wearing a very smart tailored day suit, sporting a jaunty black French beret, and has a thick, bushy brown beard.
He walks over, bends down, and affectionately kisses Carla on the cheek. Carla looks at Angela and formally introduces the man as Samuel.
Angela is completely bewildered. She is looking around for Samantha, the sister she physically kidnapped and tortured.
It isn't until Samuel spots the dark chain tattoo on Angela's neck, drops his coffee cup, and yells, "Holy fuck!" that the reality hits Angela.
Samantha is gone. The sister she kidnapped has transitioned into Samuel.
And the explanation Samuel provides is a profound, deeply moving exploration of the hidden, long-term collateral damage of extreme trauma.
Samuel sits down heavily in an armchair, his hands shaking slightly. He lights a small, expensive cigar with a gold lighter, takes a drag, and rips off the French beret,
revealing a shiny, completely bald head.
He explains that years after the terrifying kidnapping, the police interrogations, and the media circus of the trial, the sheer, unadulterated stress of what Angela put them through caused a massive physiological and psychological break.
His body simply couldn't handle the cortisol. His hair began dying and falling out in massive clumps.
He was reduced to wearing a deeply uncomfortable, highly realistic wig just to leave the house.
Yeah, Samuel delivers this incredible, poignant monologue that I think is the emotional core of the book. He describes a very specific, mundane moment of absolute misery.
He was stuck in a massive gridlock traffic jam on the M5 motorway in the dead heat of August.
The air conditioning in the car had broken. The heat was unbearable.
He describes how the nylon tights were too hot. The underwire bra was too tight and digging into his ribs.
The heavy foundation makeup was melting off his face, and the wig felt like a dead, incredibly itchy cat glued to his scalp.
And in that suffocating, sweltering moment of pure physical and emotional misery, the dam broke. He had a massive, life-altering epiphany.
He realized he didn't just hate the wig. He hated how the world treated him as a woman.
He hated censoring his voice, his mannerisms, his posture to fit into a mold that felt entirely alien.
He realized he was living a false life, performing gender to appease a society that couldn't protect him anyway.
The extreme trauma cracked his superficial identity wide open. He threw the wig out the window, joined a heavy lifting gym, became obsessed with weight training, and began the arduous process of transitioning,
powerfully claiming that his brother returned to life.
If we connect this profoundly personal revelation to the bigger picture of the scene, it serves as a devastating surgical critique of the entire concept of the apology tour.
Angela has walked into this house expecting a Hollywood moment of grace.
She sits there, awkwardly drinking their incredibly expensive imported Brazilian coffee, and delivers her neatly rehearsed speech.
She talks about finding God, about the medical miracle of her appendectomy, about her desire to make amends and clear her conscience.
But Carla and Samuel are not props in her redemption arc. They see right through the performance.
They absolutely shred her, and honestly, she deserves it. They point out the brutal, undeniable reality of the situation. Her visit, her apology, isn't about healing them.
It's a profoundly selfish act, designed purely to ease her own crushing guilt.
They basically tell her that her spiritual journey, her Bible classes, and her quiet life in Camden mean absolutely nothing to the people whose lives she permanently derailed.
Samuel angrily points out that they are still hounded by trashy tabloid reporters a decade later on every major anniversary of the crime.
They are trapped in the amber of her violence. They tell her in no uncertain terms to get out of their house.
As Angela walks slowly down the long gravel driveway, the heavy black electric gates slam shut behind her with a loud, final metallic clang.
It's the ultimate, undeniable rejection. The past cannot be apologized away.
It is a harsh dose of reality that leaves Angela deeply, profoundly depressed. She sits on a cold metal bench near the Hampstead Tube station for hours, watching the trains go by, realizing that forgiveness from the world is an absolute illusion.
She has to carry the weight. But life forces her forward, and surprisingly, amidst all this heavy trauma and rejection, she finds a glimmer of genuine, unexpected hope in the form of romance.
Back in Camden, at her sister's church, St. Matthew's, she strikes up a connection with the parish choirmaster, a man named David Postlethwaite.
David is the exact opposite of every single man in Angela's violent past. He's not a heavily tattooed drug addict, he's not a violent gang enforcer, and he's not an abusive criminal.
He's a straight-laced, incredibly gentle, almost boring man who wears crisp blue suits to church and here's a steady, pensionable job as a post office sorter.
He is currently separated from his wife, Amelia, and is patiently waiting for the divorce paperwork to finalize.
Angela is completely out of her depth with a normal man. She confesses to Anne in the kitchen that she feels like a terrified 12-year-old girl.
When David finally musters the courage to ask her out for a proper dinner, she is internally panicking but says yes.
The beauty of their courtship is how incredibly grounded and ordinary it is, which, to a woman who spent 18 years in a concrete box, feels like magic.
Their dates are mundane. They eat cheap pizza at a local Italian joint.
They take the tube to visit the penguins at the London Zoo.
They wander through the free museums at Kensington. They ride the London Eye at sunset.
But David isn't just a simpleton. He possesses a deep, fiercely intellectual moral compass.
During one of their dates at a coffee shop, he pulls out a carefully folded piece of paper from his leather wallet.
It's a quote he carries with him, from a bishop named Julio C. Martin.
I really love this specific detail in the book. David leans across the table and reads the quote to her with absolute sincerity. The church has been obsessed with sex for too long. The church should be obsessed with the corruption of souls by the capitalist promotion of greed, avarice, selfishness, individualism, indifference. More than being obsessed with what happens in the beds of the nations, the church should be obsessed with what is being inflicted by capitalism upon the souls of God's children.
Angela is absolutely floored by his depth. He isn't judging her past. He's focused on the structural sickness of the world.
She feels safe, secure, and genuinely respected for the first time in her life. After a month of dating, she sits Anne down and confesses that she's deeply in love.
David starts staying over at the Camden house. For a brief, shining moment, Angela feels like she actually has a future.
But this is a psychological thriller, and that fragile, beautiful peace is about to be obliterated in the most violent way possible.
One rainy morning, Angela takes the bus over to David's house to check on him after he fails to answer her texts or calls for 2 days.
She turns the corner onto his quiet suburban street and is met with a living nightmare.
The road is completely blocked off. There are a dozen police vehicles parked haphazardly, their blue lights flashing erratically against the gray sky.
Thick, yellow crime scene exclusion tape is strung across the road, and forensic teams in full white biohazard suits are swarming the property.
The tone of the story shifts so violently here it gives you whiplash.
Angela stands behind the tape, frozen, as a uniformed officer informs her that David and his estranged wife, Amelia, have been brutally murdered inside the house.
Hours later, sitting in a sterile interrogation room at the local police station, Inspector Bob Harris and his cynical bagman, Bill, pull Angela in for aggressive questioning.
Harris doesn't play games. He slides a glossy A4 crime scene photograph face up across the metal table.
The image is stomach-churning. David's naked, pale torso has been ritualistically mutilated. The killer has carved 8 distinct, deep parallel slashes into his chest cavity.
Angela takes one look at the photo, violently pushes her metal chair back, and claps both hands over her mouth, visibly shaking and hyperventilating.
The specific theatrical brutality of the murder instantly makes Angela the prime suspect.
Inspector Harris is a veteran. He knows her family history inside and out.
He knows that decades ago, before Angela even started her crime spree, her own mother hacked her father to pieces in a very similar, violently emotive, overkill manner.
The police immediately form a working theory. Angela, after repressing her nature for 18 years in prison, has finally snapped under the pressure of the outside world and is repeating the violent generational trauma of her family line.
Wait, I need to jump in here. The police assume she just snapped and butchered 2 people, but the terror doesn't stop with David.
It accelerates. The body count starts rising so rapidly the police can't keep up.
Just days later, an elderly, highly reclusive secretary who works at a local funeral director's office, a Miss Farthingay, is found murdered in her own home.
She is dismembered in the exact same horrific manner, 8 slashes.
Then the horror strikes terrifyingly close to home. Reverend Blake, the gentle, welcoming vicar of St. Matthew's who personally baptized Angela and welcomed her into the congregation,
along with his wife Andrea, are slaughtered inside the church itself.
The crime scene analysis shows Andrea was chased down the aisle in the dark and killed 15 meters away from her husband.
It is a bloodbath.
The police are in a frenzy. They haul Angela into the station repeatedly. They are desperate, under massive political and media pressure, to pin this string of serial killings on the famous rehabilitated murderer.
But they hit a massive brick wall. Angela has rock-solid, irrefutable alibis for every single murder.
When David and his wife were killed, Angela was clocking a double shift on the security cameras at the mega supermarket and then immediately went to clean the church with a large group of gossiping women.
When Miss Farthingay was murdered at 3 a.m., Angela was asleep in her bed, with Anne confirming she never heard her leave.
And the final nail in the police theory. During the night the vicar and his wife were murdered, Inspector Harris actually had an unmarked car with 2 plainclothes officers conducting active visual surveillance on the front door of Angela's Camden house.
They swear on their badges she never left the property.
Even with those completely airtight alibis, the court of public opinion doesn't need evidence to condemn her.
The press inevitably catches wind of the brutal murders and Angela's connection to the victims. Suddenly, her infamous violent past is front-page news all over again.
The tabloids have a field day. A highly aggressive shouting reporter from The Sun actually ambushes Angela and Anne right on their front doorstep,
shoving a massive camera lens in their faces, shouting invasive questions about the carved bodies and David's death.
Angela retreats into the house, hyperventilating, realizing that her past is a prison without walls. She is trapped.
She breaks down in the kitchen, telling Anne she just wants to pack a bag, run away to the coast, and disappear completely under an assumed name.
But escaping isn't an option, because the truth of who is committing these murders is far more sinister, intimate, and tragic than anyone, especially the police, realizes.
The climax of the story brings us to the ultimate, mind-bending betrayal. Angela comes home late one evening from her supermarket shift to find the terraced house strangely, oppressively quiet.
She walks upstairs to Anne's bedroom. The door is ajar.
Anne is standing in the middle of the room, looking completely wild and disheveled. Her hair is matted.
And she is clutching the large, heavy wooden cross that usually hangs peacefully over Angela's bed. Her knuckles are stark white from the grip.
Angela's confused. She asks Anne what happened at the church, assuming Anne is deeply upset about having to clean up the Reverend's blood from the stone floors.
But Anne looks at her with dead eyes and delivers a line that absolutely chills the blood.
She says, in a flat, monotone voice, "Nothing happened in the church. There was no cleaning. I just wanted to be there by myself. One place where I could be without your sickening presence."
And then the dam breaks and completely drops the facade of the loving, pious sister and reveals the horrifying motive behind the entire bloody conspiracy.
It all traces back to the trauma of her husband, John. Anne explains the dark, symbolic significance of the 8 carved slashes found on every single victim.
John was originally sentenced to 10 years in prison. He earned early release for good behavior.
He served exactly to the day 8 years in the brutal environment of Bureau prison because of Angela's crimes.
And tragically, horribly, he suffered a fatal heart attack and died in his cell just 8 days before he was scheduled to be released and come home to his wife.
I am struggling with the logistics here. Are you seriously telling me a woman suffering from advanced young onset Parkinson's disease A woman who has tremors, a shuffling gait, and chronic fatigue managed to physically overpower a healthy adult male choir master, mutilate him with precision, and slaughter an entire congregation? How is that physically possible?
It is the core friction of the climax, and the text explains it through the terrifying lens of psychopathic adrenaline and meticulous obsessive planning.
You have to remember, these victims knew Anne. They trusted her implicitly.
She was the frail, pious, pottery-making widow from the church. She used the element of absolute surprise. When she walked into David's house or the church, their guard was completely down.
Furthermore, the adrenaline rush of executing a plan she'd obsessed over for years temporarily overrode her neurological symptoms, a medically documented phenomenon in Parkinson's patients under extreme duress.
She didn't overpower them in a fair fight. She ambushed them with lethal, focused intent.
Anne blames Angela entirely for John's death. She firmly believes Angela's initial crimes directly caused the domino effect that killed her husband.
Anne has spent years consumed by an acidic, rotting grief, using her rigid gym routines and careful diet not just to fight Parkinson's, but to physically prepare her body for murder.
She invited Angela to live with her not out of Christian forgiveness, but to meticulously frame her for a string of horrific serial murders.
Her ultimate goal was to ensure Angela suffered a whole-life tariff, burning in a concrete cell until she died.
The sheer depth of that long-con psychopathy is astounding. It's terrifying. Anne finishes her monologue, drops the heavy wooden cross onto the carpet, and slowly opens her dressing table drawer.
She pulls out a brand new, incredibly sharp, long carving knife with a dull red handle.
Angela braces for an attack, but Anne doesn't lunge at her. Anne is too smart for that.
She knows a forensic investigation would see through a messy struggle. Defensive wounds would ruin the frame-up.
Instead, with a horrifyingly calm, serene smile, she looks Angela dead in the eye and tells her she will burn in hell.
Then Anne places the razor-sharp tip of the knife directly against her own sternum, kneels on the rug, and deliberately falls forward.
She uses her own body weight and gravity to drive the long blade so forcefully and deeply into her chest that the bloody tip literally exits the back of her neck.
It is a gruesome, nightmarish scene. Blood erupts everywhere, soaking the carpet.
Angela, operating purely on instinct and horror, rushes forward and tries to pull her sister up, getting completely covered in Anne's arterial blood in the process.
Anne is choking on her own blood, her lungs filling rapidly, but she manages to look up at Angela, whispers, "Burn in hell, sister," and dies right there on the bedroom floor.
The police, tipped off by a mysterious phone call minutes prior, storm the house shortly after, weapons drawn.
And the most frustrating part is initially, the police fall for the frame-up hook, line, and sinker.
Based on the anonymous tip to the station, they tear apart Angela's bedroom. In the very bottom drawer of her chest of drawers, hidden under some folded sweaters, they find a woman's sensible leather shoe covered in dried, flaky blood.
Forensics quickly confirms it is the right shoe belonging to Andrea Blake, the vicar's murdered wife. It's the smoking gun.
Angela is violently arrested on the spot. They drag her to the station, strip her out of her blood-soaked clothes to preserve the evidence, and force her into a sterile, humiliating white PVC forensic suit.
She is officially charged with 6 counts of premeditated murder. David, Amelia, Miss Farthingale, Reverend Blake, Andrea Blake, and her own twin sister, Anne.
She is sitting in the cold interrogation room, sweating inside this plastic suit, screaming her innocence until her throat is raw, realizing with absolute despair that her physically broken sister has completely outsmarted her.
She is facing life without parole.
So what does this all mean? How does she get out of this airtight trap? It takes the brilliant, if slightly belated, deduction of Inspector Harris to finally unravel the web.
Harris is staring at the evidence board, and he just can't shake the nagging feeling that something is fundamentally wrong.
The pieces fit together entirely too perfectly. It feels staged. He orders the forensic team to go back and thoroughly dust the local public phone box where the anonymous tip originated, the call that sent them to the house.
And that is the thread that unravels the sweater.
The forensics team pulls a partial fingerprint of a female middle finger from the phone receiver. They run it, and it's not Angela's.
It's a 100% biometric match to Ann Tenneb.
BT phone records confirm that Anne was the last person to use that specific grimy call box to dial the police station. She called in her own murder to frame her sister.
But that still leaves a massive, glaring logistical hole in the police's timeline. How did Anne get out of the house to commit the church murders while the plainclothes police were literally parked out front, watching the only door?
Harris and his bagman, Bill, return to the Camden house, bypass the bloody bedroom, and focus on the garden. They walk all the way down the narrow lawn to the unassuming B&Q wooden shed where Anne spent hours doing her pottery.
Harris walks into the cramped shed. It smells of damp clay and dust. He meticulously examines the back wall. To the naked eye, it looks like a solid wooden wall with an overgrown ivy plant creeping up against it from the outside.
But Harris pushes against a specific panel, and the wall gives way. It's not a wall at all. It's a brilliantly, cleverly constructed, hidden false door.
Anne had spent months secretly sawing and building a hidden exit at the back of her property that led directly out into the narrow, unlit alleyway behind the terrace houses.
She could slip in and out of the property completely undetected, entirely bypassing the police officers parked at the front curb.
And hidden inside the hollow cavity of that false wall structure, they find the motherlode of evidence.
They find a heavy plastic bin bag containing Anne's blood-soaked murder clothes, a dark tracksuit and gloves, the garments she wore while butchering her victims to ensure she never brought a single drop of forensic evidence back into the main house to contaminate her own pristine environment.
The elaborate frame-up completely disintegrates. The forensic analysis of the dull red carving knife from the suicide shows absolutely zero fingerprints belonging to Angela.
Furthermore, the blood spatter analysis on Angela's clothes perfectly matches her frantic story of trying to lift her sister after the suicide, rather than the high-velocity spatter you would expect from someone actively stabbing a victim.
Inspector Harris takes this overwhelming pile of exculpatory evidence directly to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
5 agonizing days later, Angela is standing in a secure courtroom at Huntington HMP. The judge looks down from the bench, reviews the file, and utters 5 incredibly heavy words. "You are free to go."
She is officially exonerated, but calling it a victory feels incredibly hollow.
Angela walks out of the prison gates and into the bright, blinding sunlight, but she is completely, utterly alone in the universe.
Her sister is dead, her reputation ruined, and her memory stained by the revelation that she was a calculating monster.
The only man who ever truly loved her, David, is dead. Her church community is massacred and shattered.
The quiet, peaceful life she tried so hard to build is permanently destroyed by the sensationalized, relentless press coverage of the murders.
And let's not forget the terrifying loose threads still dangling in the dark, rain-slicked alleys of Camden.
Jill Martin is still out there.
Remember her? The heavily tattooed woman hell-bent on bloody revenge.
While Anne was executing her master plan, Jill had been stalking Angela from the shadows, sleeping rough in an abandoned, boarded-up terrace house a few streets over.
But in a twist of incredibly dark, tragic fate, while Jill was hiding in that house, 2 homeless squatters broke in to find shelter.
In the pitch blackness of the boarded-up room, Jill panicked. Operating on her feral trauma response, she assumed she was being attacked by Angela's associates or the police.
She pulled her Argos knives and brutally stabbed both squatters to death in the dark. She robbed their corpses of whatever loose change they had to buy fresh clothes.
Jill is now a double murderer herself, wandering the streets of London like a ghost, still violently clutching onto her misplaced vow to destroy Angela, completely unaware that Anne has already decimated Angela's life far more effectively than a knife ever could.
It is a stunning, breathtakingly bleak resolution. When you step back and look at the entire narrative arc, the irony is incredibly potent.
Angela, the certified, documented psychopath who brutally murdered 5 people and shot police officers, actually underwent a profound transformation.
Whether you choose to attribute it to the bizarre neurological shock of an emergency appendectomy or a genuine, divine spiritual awakening, she actively sought peace.
She sought rehabilitation, quiet servitude, and love. She became gentle.
Precisely. While Anne, the supposedly good twin, the innocent, pious victim who stood by her sister and suffered the tragic, unjust loss of her husband to the penal system, harbored a psychopathic level of patience and cruelty.
Driven by a rotting grief and the physical decay of her own body, Anne incubated a darkness far more calculating, far more terrifying than Angela's explosive rage ever was.
It challenges our fundamental assumptions about inherent evil versus circumstantial trauma. It asks if monsters are born or if they are meticulously forged by the injustices of the world around them.
It really does. It paints a terrifying picture of how the past is never truly buried, no matter how much dirt you throw on it.
You can serve your time in solitary. You can find God. You can literally have your gang tattoos lasered off your skin. But the trauma you cause ripples outward like a shockwave.
It infects people. It corrupts the innocent, turning them into the very thing they hated.
It destroys lives decades after the original crime was committed. Which brings us to the end of today's deep dive and a final, lingering thought for you to ponder as you go about your day.
We talked extensively about how Angela believed the darkness, the literal evil inside her, physically fled her body when she was under anesthesia.
If a physical operation or a moment of trauma can supposedly cut the evil out of a person, like extracting a tumor, where does that evil actually go? Does it simply vanish into the ether? Or does it act like a virus, sinking a new host, infecting the people closest to them? Think about Anne, meticulously spinning a web of death and butchery from her quaint suburban garden shed.
When the true monster is finally rehabilitated and steps into the light.
Who steps up to take their place in the dark? Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey for the sources. We'll catch you next time.